She had her handwritten love letter read aloud for mockery. Lana Taylor, your eyes are like the first sunlight of spring. Ha ha, who even writes this stuff anymore? Only someone truly pathetic still sends handwritten letters. Must have been from the janitor, or maybe she wrote it to herself. Someone snorted. A designer streamed the whole thing into the office group chat. Legend of the week, handwritten love confession in the 4. Euro era. As Lana knelt to retrieve the crumpled letter, a coworker tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. That doesn't belong in a professional environment. No one defended her. Not a word was spoken in her favor. The open-plan office echoed with whispers and muffled laughs, while Lana quietly straightened her dress and walked back to her desk, her face unreadable. In that airy workspace, the walls were plastered with bright creative posters, and large windows let in a flood of natural light that made every gleaming surface reflect the hustle of a design firm priding itself on innovation. Employees strutted around in cutting-edge outfits, vibrant prints, neon sneakers, hair dyed in every color of the rainbow. By contrast, Lana's plain white floral dress with its modest square neckline looked as though it belonged in a different time. A few coworkers smirked at her simple silver bracelet tarnished from years of wear and whispered that she had no sense of fashion. A tall man in a floral suit leaned against a cubicle divider, shaking his head in mock pity. Handwritten letters are so last century, he murmured loud enough for others to hear. Another coworker, her hair styled in a dramatic undercut dyed lavender, flicked open her phone and typed a message to their group chat. She's seriously behind the times, like is she trying to be a retro princess or what? Lana, not reacting, settled into her chair with practiced calm, ignoring the hush that followed. Even the soft whir of the air conditioner seemed to underline the tension, as if everything converged to point out her isolation. The design team thrived on flamboyance and liked to mock anything unpolished. They had cultivated a culture of ironically praising vintage styles yet scorning anything that seemed authentically old-fashioned. Thus, Lana's refusal to participate in social media trends or even wear a dab of lipstick became fodder for their daily amusements. Her desk sat near the far corner away from the panoramic windows. There she quietly arranged papers and unopened envelopes, methodically lining them up. One contained a slender embossed invitation from the CEO's office, something about an upcoming investor visit. She tapped it once as though remembering the humiliating scene just moments before, then slipped it under a stack of design briefs. Across the office, a group of younger employees rehashed the love letter incident between them, texting screenshots of the torn note. Their occasional bursts of laughter drifted in waves, pricking the silence around her. Lana's gaze flickered toward a small photograph pinned to the edge of her monitor, an older gentleman standing beside a black car, smiling. She didn't sigh or look pained, she simply stared for a moment, then returned to the files in front of her. One of the newly hired interns approached with hesitant steps, carrying a sheaf of documents. He set them on her desk, eyes darting nervously, and mumbled that he needed a signature. She took the pen calmly, scribbled her name, and handed them back without so much as a tremor in her voice. The intern glanced at the remains of the torn letter peeking out from the wastebasket, curiosity igniting in his eyes. For a second, it appeared he might ask about it, but he stilled his tongue. Behind them, the tall man in the floral suit, who went by Marco, raised his voice in a mock lecture tone for the intern to hear. Be careful around Ms. Handwritten letters. She might slip some quill and ink romance on your desk. Laughter rippled among the surrounding cubicles. The intern's cheeks flushed and he slipped away quickly. Lana continued typing, ignoring the jibes as though they were a faint breeze. A motion near the door caught everyone's attention. The receptionist came rushing in, face flushed, stammering about a VIP visitor. People froze, expecting maybe a high-profile client or a senior manager from the corporate branch. Instead, they heard the receptionist say, "He's asking for the woman in the white floral dress." At that exact moment, a jarring beep signaled a message in the company's group chat. A freshly posted update read, "Breaking news, some random big shot is here. Could be the rumored billionaire investor." That word billionaire sent a wave of excitement skittering across the floor. Conversations halted. Employees straightened their outfits, and a few quickly adjusted their hair in hand mirrors. Marco even switched out his pastel pink glasses for a sleek black pair, hoping to project a more professional image. Then the door swung open and in walked Darren Blackwell, the man whose name had graced countless headlines and Forbes lists. He was younger than some had expected, tall and confident, wearing a tailored suit in a subtle charcoal shade that highlighted his striking features. A hush fell on the entire office. Everyone's eyes shifted from the billionaire to Lana. All movement ceased. If a pen fell, no one would have heard it. Darren's gaze surveyed the rows of identical desks, the well-dressed employees, and the fancy design elements adorning the walls. Then, with quiet determination, he crossed the room until he stood before Lana's small desk in the corner. Lana slowly rose from her chair, her plain dress illuminated by the overhead lights that seemed to catch the delicate floral pattern like an echo of an earlier era. Darren dropped to one knee in front of her, producing a sealed envelope from his breast pocket. It looked identical to the one that had just been torn like a letter from another time, with thick, creamy paper and a faint floral scent. He broke the seal and cleared his throat. The entire office stood in shock, phones, forgotten hearts thudding. Lana Darren, red voice resonating in the hush. Thank you for staying so beautifully simple in a world that's lost itself, trying to be impressive. Will you marry me? He looked up, searching her face. The office was so silent that even the humming fluorescent lights seemed muted. A wave of stunned realization swept through the employees. This entire time, the letter they had mocked so viciously was from Darren Blackwell, a world-famous tech billionaire and their own company's largest private investor. Gasps rose from those who had ridiculed Lana moments earlier. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others stared at their shoes or the floor, and a few swiveled anxiously in their chairs, recalling the harsh words they'd so casually thrown at her. The tension crackled, ready to erupt into chaos. Lana's features remained composed, though a faint warmth touched her cheeks. She clasped her hands, that single silver bracelet catching the light. She glanced down at Darren, who was offering a ring. No, an entire promise. Slowly she nodded. Before the shockwaves could subside, Darren stood, turning to address the room. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making big decisions. Anyone who humiliated Lana will be recommended for reassignment, he said, letting each syllable drop like a stone into a pond. I want this company to know that class is not appearance, it's character. Faces blanched. The head of human resources, perched near the glass-walled conference room, looked on the verge of fainting. The CEO, who'd been in a private meeting, pressed himself against the glass wall, uncertain whether to interrupt this dramatic display. No one dared to speak. Lana simply lowered her gaze, a quiet acceptance, as if she wasn't surprised that Darren would stand up for her so directly. In that moment, the entire atmosphere of the open-plan office shifted, the cruelty replaced by a sudden, uncomfortable awareness of how deeply they had erred. In the uneasy stillness that followed, Darren reached for Lana's hand, cradling it in his own. He led her away from the wastebasket where the remains of the first letter had been tossed. The employees who'd tormented her shrank back. Marco stepped aside, a flush crawling up his neck, and the coworker with the lavender undercut lowered her phone, too embarrassed to record or stream. Lana moved with a composed grace, her chin lifted just enough to convey dignity without pride. Together, they disappeared into the CEO's office, the door clicking shut behind them. Outside, the employees turned to one another, voices hushed and tinged with guilt. The letter had been from Darren all along. Their casual words, streamed to the entire group chat, now seemed monstrous. A hush of shame circled the cubicles as people hovered near the battered remains of that love letter in the trash, not sure if they should pick it up or pretend it never existed. The hush endured until the hum of the HVAC system and the faint beep of a phone message signaled the world continuing on indifferent. Inside the CEO's office, the blinds were half drawn, filtering the midday sun into stripes across the floor. Darren spoke quietly to the startled CEO, clarifying that while he remained committed to his investment, he could not in good conscience stand by and watch the staff degrade someone he cared about. Lana stood by the window, her hands folded, her eyes resting on the city skyline beyond the tinted glass. She was present but also apart, as though she'd perfected the art of not drawing attention. The CEO stammered out assurances that the company would address this incident immediately. Darren glanced at Lana, his expression softening. Outside, employees gathered in clumps, straining to catch any scraps of conversation through the glass. All they could see was Darren's tall silhouette and Lana's still figure. A memory flickered through a few minds, times they'd seen Lana quietly stepping aside when teased or overshadowed. How many times had they brushed off that old silver bracelet she always wore, never suspecting the significance behind her modest appearance? Somewhere near the break room, a senior designer sank into a chair, pressing a hand to his temple. He remembered how a week earlier he'd teased Lana for not owning any modern gadgets, joking that maybe she communicated via messenger pigeon. She had smiled, a patient, almost cryptic smile, and said nothing. Another coworker gazed at the half-torn letter in the trash, recalling the borderline cruel comments she'd made about Lana's outdated ways. If any of them had paused to wonder about the origin of that envelope or the handwriting, none had done so with true curiosity. They only used it as ammunition for a quick laugh. Now confronted by Darren's presence and that public proposal, they felt a collective pinch of regret. The ring of phones in the distance, the clatter of a dropped stapler, and the tapping of someone's shoe echoed uncomfortably in the expansive space. A brief flash of memory formed in Lana's mind as she waited by the window. She recalled standing in a dusty antique shop months ago searching among old postcards. A faint aroma of aged paper had reminded her of a hidden study in a country estate. She was there alone, wearing the same silver bracelet, turning each postcard carefully lost in a quiet recollection. She found a single note on cream-colored stationery filled with an ornate scrawl which she recognized. It was her father's handwriting from decades before, a fragment of a letter he'd once written to her mother. Lana had bought it without bargaining, tucking it into her purse and leaving the shop with a slight tightening in her chest. She'd said nothing to the shop owner about her connection to the piece. She never mentioned to anyone that her father was a man of considerable influence known for philanthropic endeavors. That memory tugged at her now as Darren's voice filtered through the glass door behind her. He was calmly explaining to the CEO how the corporate culture needed a serious reevaluation. When Darren finished speaking, he approached Lana by the window, brushing a hand lightly against her arm to catch her attention. The CEO, wringing his hands, promised to dispatch an internal memo, call a staff meeting, and enforce a new code of conduct. He kept glancing at Lana as though seeing her for the first time. Darren opened the door for her and they stepped out into the main office area where the employees fell silent. Not a single witty remark was launched their way. Lana's eyes traveled across the faces, many of which were now tinged with apprehension. She did not scowl or look triumphant. She merely inclined her head in a manner that suggested no desire for revenge. The hush seemed to deepen as Darren placed an arm around her shoulders and guided her to the exit. The faint click of the door as they left reverberated through every cubicle. In that moment, no one knew if they should applaud, apologize, or slip away in shame. That evening, the story of what happened spread like wildfire on internal chat groups. Everyone had an opinion. Some felt sorry for Lana. Others were horrified at the idea of being recommended for reassignment, and a few cynics wondered if this was a publicity stunt. But one fact was undeniable. Darren Blackwell was clearly the one behind the handwritten letter, and he was engaged to Lana. The office's typical gossip about streaming new design technology or edgy creative campaigns pivoted into fervent discussions about her. Who was she? Why did she dress so simply if she was set to marry a billionaire? Why did she never mention her connection to him? A swirl of speculation turned into a storm of rumors. Yet none of them had an answer to the real question. How had this boring woman in a white floral dress captured the heart of an influential figure like Darren Blackwell? By 9 o'clock, the office was nearly empty, save for a few late workers hunched over their projects. Lana's desk lamp remained on, illuminating a neat pile of files. She had told Darren she had tasks to finish, and he had given her a small nod, stepping out to take a call. Now she sat alone, methodically reviewing design presentations for a children's educational app that the company was working on. Every so often she paused, pressing her fingers against the silver bracelet. In a quiet moment, a memory surfaced, a day when she was much younger, seated at a grand piano in a vast room with vaulted ceilings. An elderly mentor bowed before her, instructing her to keep posture, reminding her that discipline and virtue were more important than showy talent. She remembered the hush of that estate, the way the light filtered through stained glass windows, and how she'd quietly resolved she wanted to lead a life unburdened by expectation. That reflection faded as she closed the last file, exhaling softly. She switched off her lamp and Rose, the only occupant left in the open plan. The torn scraps of her letter were gone. The janitorial staff must have cleaned them up. She left without glancing back. Outside, a sleek black car idled at the curb, the driver leaning against the hood. Recognizing him, Lana offered a small nod. He opened the rear door for her. Inside, Darren sat scanning his phone, eyes lighting up when she entered. Without a word, he slipped his hand around hers. The car pulled away, merging into the city's neon-lit traffic, leaving behind the luminous windows of the design firm. Neither of them spoke, but there was a quiet understanding that swirled in the air like a gentle current. Every so often, Darren's gaze swept over her as if to reassure himself that she was okay. She looked forward, her expression calm, not betraying any turmoil or triumph. The city lights played across her face, revealing someone who wore composure like a second skin. When the car reached her modest apartment building, Darren walked her to the door. The building was well maintained but unremarkable, surrounded by more extravagant complexes that boasted fitness centers and rooftop gardens. Lana preferred it here, anonymous quiet close to her daily routines. Darren lingered outside her door, hesitant to leave, brushing a stray hair away from her cheek. She unlocked the door and gestured for him to come in. The interior was clean, sparely furnished with personal items arranged in meticulous order. He glanced around, noticing very little beyond a few books, a framed picture of an older couple and a porcelain teacup collection displayed on a tiny shelf. The place exuded a sense of old-world gentleness. He handed her the intact letter, the second envelope he'd read from earlier, and she slipped it onto a small desk without reading it again. Darren began to speak, but stopped as if uncertain how to address the cruelty she'd endured that day. Lana's gaze settled on him. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on his arm, almost a silent reassurance that no explanation was necessary. He cupped her cheek, but she maintained that same quiet composure, neither inviting pity nor expressing bitterness. Something in her stillness reminded Darren of their first meeting, which had happened in an unassuming bookstore that smelled of dust and new pages. He had been drawn to her as she studied an old volume of poetry, carefully turning the yellowed pages as if they were made of glass. He recalled how her eyes flicked to him, calm, questioning, yet not a hint of shyness. She had recognized him from the magazines but said nothing. Instead, she asked about the poem he was reading, and that was the start of everything. He left after a short while, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Lana closed the door behind him, standing in her quiet living room. The memory of the day's events flickered around her. The letter read aloud the scorn, then Darren's sudden appearance. She stepped over to a small table by the window, where a set of bamboo wind chimes hung, and ran her hand over the smooth surface of the table. A subtle gesture, perhaps a private ritual of grounding. Outside, the city buzzed with nightlife, but her apartment remained a sanctuary of hush. She made a mental note to check on her backlog of design tasks tomorrow. There were plenty of responsibilities to be addressed, especially if Darren truly intended to push for a cultural shift at the company. In the distance, a siren wailed, then faded, and she switched off the lamp, welcoming the calm darkness. Morning arrived with a swirl of tension at the design firm. Word had spread of impending changes. The CEO had called an all-hands meeting. Posters were taken down, replaced by official memos about respect in the workplace. The new corporate motto focusing on authenticity and kindness as innovation. Some employees rolled their eyes, suspecting it was mere PR damage control. Others felt genuine remorse, remembering how they had ridiculed Lana. She arrived precisely at 9, wearing the same style of plain floral dress, but with a slightly different pattern and the same bracelet. The hush that fell over the floor was different now, less mocking, more cautious. She returned polite greetings with a polite nod, then made her way to her desk. A small stack of letters typed on official stationery lay atop her workspace, likely delivered by HR or from certain coworkers. She set them aside unopened. At 10, the entire staff convened in the largest meeting area, a glass-walled lounge near the entrance. The CEO stood in front of them, flanked by HR. They recited a formal statement about the company's new commitment to professional courtesy, referencing an incident they would not name but that everyone understood. A few employees cast glances at Lana, who stood at the back in her usual silence. Marco, fidgeting with his flamboyant tie, looked especially ill at ease. He had been among the loudest voices mocking the letter. After the CEO concluded with an awkward flourish of corporate rhetoric, employees began to disperse. But Lana remained, noticing a half-dozen or so coworkers hanging around, clearly wanting to speak to her. They approached slowly, offering stammered apologies. One thrust a piece of paper at her, an apology letter they had typed out. Another tried to explain that they never meant to hurt her, it was all just office fun. She simply took each note with a graceful nod, betraying no anger. This left them almost more unsettled than if she had yelled, because her calm acceptance highlighted their cruelty. One by one they drifted away. During lunch, Lana sat at a small table in the break room, nibbling on a sandwich. 2 junior designers approached, looking nervous. They asked tentatively if they could join her. She inclined her head for them to sit. Awkwardly, they tried to start a conversation about a new project. One of them thanked her for always returning their calls so promptly. Another admitted they once ridiculed her behind her back and wanted to say they were sorry. Lana set her sandwich down, folded her hands, and simply said, "Thank you for telling me." Then she resumed eating, offering no further condemnation. When the two parted, one whispered to the other that they'd never met anyone so calm in the face of such adversity. Word spread Lana never once raised her voice or demanded retribution. She just carried on fulfilling her duties quietly, receiving apologies like someone collecting small shells on a beach. As the day wore on, Darren made no appearance in the office. Rumors circulated about whether the threatened reassignments would really happen. Some employees feared he'd send half the staff packing. Others doubted he'd enforce anything drastic. Yet subtle changes were already unfolding. The group chat that once buzzed with snarky commentary was conspicuously silent. People were more careful about their jokes, especially around personal topics. Several of the boldest coworkers realized they missed the easy cruelty that used to pass for humor, but none dared to openly say so, not after the new corporate guidelines. A few days later, Lana strolled into the lobby to find a large cardboard box sitting at the reception desk. A bright label read, "To Lana, letters of apology." She paused, turning her head slightly in curiosity. The receptionist flushed, explaining that many colleagues who felt uneasy approaching her directly had deposited letters or notes inside hoping to make amends. Without a word, Lana lifted the box in her arms. On her way back to her desk, she passed a short, neatly dressed man from finance who'd once sneered at her. He blushed and looked away. She offered him a brief, understanding smile. That night, she took the box home, left it in a corner of her apartment, and did not open it. Flashbacks nudged at her again when she set the box down next to an antique cabinet. She recalled a day in a grand library on her family's estate after she'd turned 18. Her father had placed a thick ledger on a polished table explaining that a significant inheritance and business empire awaited her management. She could have everything: the estate, the staff, the philanthropic funds, a seat at international conferences. She only needed to assume her rightful place, keep up appearances, and lead the family legacy. But Lana had quietly placed her hand over the ledger, shaking her head. She'd walked away without a fight, never raising her voice. Her father's old friend, the family chauffeur, had saluted her as she passed, eyes gleaming with respect. She remembered stepping out into the crisp air, the estate's vast gardens behind her, feeling certain she wanted an ordinary life where she wouldn't be shielded by wealth or forced into hollow obligations. Even now, that memory reminded her of the discipline she'd been taught. Extravagance was emptiness if the heart was not free. The next morning, Darren texted her to say he'd be stopping by the office for a planned investors meeting. This time, no one broadcast his arrival in the group chat. People had learned caution. When he did show up, he wore a calm, businesslike expression. A meeting with the CEO and upper management took place behind closed doors for a couple of hours. Lana worked steadily at her desk, not visibly perturbed by his presence. Once the meeting ended, Darren asked if he could see the new design proposals for the children's educational app. Lana collected the relevant files and led him to a small conference room. As they walked, employees parted to let them pass, a hush enveloping the corridors. The two of them spent the next hour discussing fonts, color palettes, and user interface. At times, Darren offered suggestions, but mostly he listened to Lana's quiet insights about user-friendliness and the importance of inclusivity in design. She'd done her homework thoroughly. Outside the glass walls, the staff craned their necks to see if the couple would display any affection. But there was nothing sensational, just professional collaboration. Eventually, they emerged and parted ways without drama. Curious eyes followed Lana as she returned to her desk. Some employees wanted to corner her with questions. "Are you really a billionaire's fiancé? Why didn't you tell us?" But her reserved demeanor discouraged direct confrontation. Later that afternoon, while heading to the break room, she caught a snippet of conversation from two marketing managers whispering near the printer. "She's so weird, right? Doesn't brag, doesn't show off, and she just, well, exists. If that was me, I'd be strutting around in diamonds." The other manager shooshed them, glancing around anxiously. Lana paused just around the corner, listening. She made no attempt to correct or blame them. She merely continued on her way, returning to her desk with the same measured steps as though she'd long ago learned that explanations given to cynics fell on deaf ears. In the weeks that followed, the promised recommendations for reassignment began to trickle down. A couple of employees who had been the cruelest were quietly moved to less desirable departments. HR circulated training materials on respectful communication. The group chat was repurposed for strictly business-related announcements. A wave of relief and guilt intermingled among the staff, who realized that while the changes might seem harsh, they were the result of something profoundly broken in the office culture. In that same period, Lana continued her duties as usual, rarely referencing Darren or the big shift. But everyone knew her presence carried new weight, and her silence was no longer an invitation for mockery, but a reminder of what had happened. A subdued sense of respect grew, especially among those who recognized the grace with which Lana had handled it all. It didn't vanish overnight, but people stopped rolling their eyes at her minimal makeup, her straightforward clothes, her single silver bracelet. One day she arrived wearing the same style of floral dress, but the pattern was pink blossoms instead of blue, prompting a coworker to compliment her quietly. Instead of the old sneering remarks about boring attire, there was a gentle shift toward acceptance. Lana acknowledged the compliment with a nod, still not flamboyant or overly chatty, just gracious. She never brought up her father's vast estate or her own partial ownership in several philanthropic organizations. She never boasted that she'd already turned down multiple offers to live in luxurious penthouses. And no one dared ask too many questions, unsure if they wanted to confront just how wrong their assumptions had been. Over time, employees took note of smaller details, how Lana always volunteered to help new hires fill out complicated forms, or how she would stay late if a critical deadline loomed, never complaining. She rarely joined the group for after-work drinks, but she also never preached or judged. Her quiet choices became a kind of gentle guideline for the office's new culture. Do your work well, respect others, and don't resort to petty cruelty. In subtle ways, the company's vibe improved. People still expressed individuality, but the daily mockery diminished. Even Marco, stripped of his old arrogance, seemed to mellow, adopting a more respectful tone with those around him. One afternoon, the CEO requested Lana's presence in his office. She stepped in, noticing how he nervously fiddled with his pen. "I wanted to extend my personal apologies," he began. "I didn't protect you when that letter got passed around. I should have stepped in sooner." Lana inclined her head, and the CEO continued. "Your fiancé's investment is important, but so is the well-being of our staff. I intend to do better." He hesitated, waiting for her reaction. She said nothing. He exhaled, nodded, and handed her a short letter. It read, "On behalf of the company, we acknowledge the harm you suffered and pledge to prevent such incidents. Thank you for your grace in handling the matter." She read it, then set it aside, offering the CEO the same poised expression she'd given so many others. He sighed in relief, as if granted a reprieve from a sentence. She walked out calmly, returning to her desk. A new hush fell across the office that day, one tinted not with scorn, but with reflection. Employees saw how the CEO, a man seldom known for humility, had been compelled to apologize personally. They recognized Lana's unwavering composure as the catalyst for these changes. Her quiet presence had unmasked their toxic patterns more effectively than any confrontation could have. Around 5 o'clock, the HR director approached Lana's desk with another small stack of papers, more apology notes from staff members who had found it too intimidating to speak to her face to face. She accepted them gently, placed them in her drawer, and resumed shutting down her computer for the day. Outside, the sky glowed orange, with the setting sun reflecting off the office windows in a brilliant show of color. Lana walked out, white floral dress, catching that warm light, and no one dared utter a joke about her choice of attire. Darren texted her that evening, saying he wanted to meet. They arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant near her apartment. He arrived ahead of her, securing a corner table away from prying eyes. When she entered, heads turned briefly. Some recognized him, but he gestured discreetly, and the curious onlookers soon returned to their meals. Lana sat down, smoothing her dress under her as she did so. Darren looked at her with open admiration. They spoke about everyday matters, how her day at work went, the children's educational app design, a future philanthropic project he was planning. Eventually, the conversation shifted to their impending wedding. "I'm sure you'd rather keep it small," Darren remarked. Lana nodded slightly, remembering the flash of an earlier moment when her father insisted any wedding of hers would be a grand affair. She'd refused, wanting no spectacle. Darren smiled gently, telling her that as long as she was by his side, that was enough for him. There was no gushing romance in their words, but a steady mutual understanding that rooted them together. After dinner, they strolled side by side under the streetlights, his arm around her, quiet and content. A few days later, Lana approached the receptionist with a request. She wanted to schedule a small after-hours event in the office lounge. The receptionist, wide-eyed, asked if it was for the wedding. Lana simply shook her head and said, "No, something else." She then proceeded to put up a discreet poster near the coffee machines. It read, "Art Exhibit in Praise of Simplicity." Hosted by Lana Taylor, featuring letters of apology. People blinked, uncertain if they'd read that correctly. She provided no further explanation. Whispers spread, was she going to shame everyone by publicly displaying their apologies? Some employees grew anxious, recalling the hurtful things they had written about her. Others hoped it might be an opportunity for closure. The day of the exhibit arrived and the lounge was cleared after 6 p.m. Chairs were arranged and a few co-workers gathered out of curiosity or concern. To their surprise, the environment looked serene, not accusatory. In the center of the lounge stood easels displaying carefully arranged letters, each pinned or clipped in a way that allowed people to read excerpts. Some letters were short, "I'm sorry I ever said those hurtful things." Others were more detailed, describing the writer's own insecurities and regrets for taking them out on Lana. Instead of naming or shaming, Lana had neatly removed any identifying information, letting the words stand on their own. Over soft instrumental music, employees wandered among the letters, reading them quietly. A hush descended as they realized the focus wasn't on mocking them back, but on showcasing the transformative power of remorse and empathy. Near the far wall, another series of frames displayed uplifting quotes about kindness and authenticity. And in the corner, a small section held a half-repaired scrap of the original love letter Darren had sent her, carefully taped with a note beneath it. "Beauty is not lost in tears, nor in rips. It only needs a gentle hand to restore it." Lana stood at the periphery, watching staff members react. Some blushed, others wiped tears. A few approached her directly, murmuring thanks or apologies anew. She nodded softly, receiving each person without judgment. Marco, who had once openly laughed at her, stood in front of a letter he recognized as his own. "I'm sorry I wrote those words," he said under his breath, turning to her. "I really am." She gave him the slightest upturn of her lips, a sign of acceptance. This was the closure many needed. Word reached the CEO, who attended incognito for a few minutes, witnessing a scene of genuine contrition, unlike any corporate training seminar could produce. By the end of the evening, employees departed quietly, as though they had participated in something more akin to a communal healing ritual than an art exhibit. Over the next few weeks, the shift in the office became tangible. Instead of cutthroat competition over who had the flashiest ideas, the team began collaborating, more valuing each member's contributions. The children's educational app progressed smoothly, with Lana providing key insights that balanced creativity with functionality. The CEO, taking a cue from all that had transpired, set up a monthly staff forum where people could voice concerns without fear of ridicule. The company's internal communications platforms pivoted towards celebrating small acts of kindness. And in the midst of it all, Darren's presence, though not daily, remained a steady reminder that respect was not just a corporate buzzword, but a necessity for maintaining his investment and support. One sunny afternoon, Darren arrived unannounced. He asked Lana if she'd like to step outside for a moment, then led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. He held her hands, looking directly into her eyes. Softly, he said he'd spoken with her father, fulfilling the courtesy of asking for her hand. Lana's expression didn't change, but an almost imperceptible relief seemed to cross her features. He explained that her father had been gracious, acknowledging he'd known for some time that Lana would make her own choices. Darren then asked how she felt about the wedding date. She simply looked out at the skyline and nodded once. There was no elaborate announcement, no ring brandished for onlookers. Just the hush of mutual understanding on a balcony high above the crowded streets. Inside, employees who peeked through the glass door saw them standing close, sharing a silent vow. It was enough to warm the hearts of even the staunchest cynics. On the day the official engagement announcement went public, released as a brief statement in major business publications, Lana received a flurry of phone calls she mostly let go to voicemail. The office congratulated her tentatively, uncertain if they were overstepping. She accepted their best wishes with the same poised nod. A few of her earlier tormentors left small gifts on her desk, tokens of contrition. She quietly placed them in her drawer alongside the rest of the letters. Over time, some apologized face-to-face again, and she would respond with a slight smile, maybe a soft thank you. The company's staff found themselves changed by her unwavering grace, finding no place for cynicism in the face of such calm perseverance. When the wedding finally took place, it was a small ceremony on the outskirts of the city in a modest garden. Darren stood at the altar, eyes bright, as he watched Lana step forward in a simple white dress reminiscent of her daily attire, only slightly more refined. The silver bracelet, polished but still bearing signs of age, adorned her wrist. A handful of close friends, some family, and a few colleagues attended, including the CEO and HR director, both subdued and respectful. It was not a grand spectacle, no paparazzi, no televised coverage. Just an intimate gathering that felt more like a quiet pledge than a performance. Afterward, they shared tea and light refreshments under the evening sky. Among the guests, an old man in a chauffeur's uniform lingered by the garden's edge, smiling as though proud to witness the continuation of a story that began long ago on that distant estate. Returning to work after a brief honeymoon, Lana continued her role. Everyone expected her to resign to leave the firm behind and move to a life of luxury with Darren. But she arrived one morning in her customary white floral dress, stepping off the elevator with her neat files under one arm. Co-workers greeted her more warmly, now relieved that she hadn't changed into some untouchable figure. She simply nodded and went about her duties. Over time, she began taking on a sort of mentorship role for newer employees, quietly guiding them away from gossip and negativity, encouraging them to share ideas kindly. People gravitated to her not out of fear of her billionaire husband, but out of genuine respect for the moral leadership she embodied without ever boasting or preaching. The memory of that humiliating day when her letter had been read aloud receded, overshadowed by the office's transformation. Still, once in a while, someone would reference it with remorse. The story became a cautionary tale about judging others based on appearances, a reminder of how one act of cruelty can unravel the entire fabric of workplace culture. And in that same breath, it stood as a testament to how one woman's quiet endurance, backed by the unwavering support of someone who loved her, could reshape an entire environment. A few months later, the children's app launched, successfully receiving rave reviews for its inclusive design. During the small in-house celebration, the CEO made a toast to everyone's contributions, locking eyes with Lana to silently acknowledge her integral role. Meanwhile, letters continued to arrive, this time from people outside the firm, requesting advice or thanking her for the example she'd set through the community art exhibit. Lana curated them, turning them into an online presentation available to staff. In praise of simplicity, the exhibit's title had become a quiet movement within the company culture. Some employees even found themselves sending handwritten notes to each other, small gestures of appreciation or empathy, no longer ridiculing the old-fashioned practice. Over time, the lessons gleaned from Lana's presence settled into a new normal, an environment less dazzled by shallow flamboyance, more appreciative of genuine character. The HR department restructured its approach, introducing weekly empathy workshops. Supervisors began encouraging collaboration, praising small acts of kindness, and celebrating personal achievements without overshadowing others. Productivity and morale rose in tandem. It was never a perfect place, some cynics remained, and the demands of the industry still fueled stress, but a foundation had been laid. People remembered how the entire dynamic shifted when a quiet woman's dignity stood unbroken in the face of cruel mockery and the might of a single intervention by someone who genuinely loved her. Eventually, the day came when Darren announced he would partially withdraw from direct oversight, trusting the CEO to continue these policies. He said he believed the company had righted its course. In the farewell email he sent to the staff, he mentioned only one name, Lana. He thanked her for reminding us that strength is not always loud, but it's always clear, and expressed confidence that the firm would honor the lessons learned. That final note closed a chapter of upheaval, leaving behind a calmer, more introspective workforce. Lana continued to show up daily, doing the same tasks she always did, wearing the same style of dress hair in the same gentle waves bracelet always on her wrist. Now, though people saw her differently, not as a relic from a bygone era, but as a guiding presence who offered genuine kindness without expecting any in return. Her desk was occasionally adorned with small gifts of gratitude or heartfelt notes which she'd politely thank them for and place in her drawer. She never boasted about her marriage to Darren or flaunted privileges. When coworkers asked if she lived in a mansion, she'd merely say her apartment was still where she felt most at home. Darren visited rarely, each time welcomed warmly by staff who had once trembled at the thought of crossing him. But with every visit, his unwavering respect for Lana shone through, and people understood that love does not require ostentation when it rests on mutual regard. Months stretched into a year, and the humiliating scene that once burned in everyone's mind remained only as a quiet, cautionary memory. Instead, the more lasting imprint was the company-wide shift toward authenticity. The staff took pride in how they'd grown. Lana occasionally glanced at the corner of her desk, where the original torn letter sat in a small envelope taped back together. It was a gentle reminder of how cruelty can be undone with truth, and how truth once revealed needed no dramatic flourish to be heard. She never raised her voice. She never asked to be defended. But when he showed up, she didn't need to. because the truth had always been quietly waiting behind her smile. And if you feel a soft warmth in your chest, let it remain there, gently reminding you that even in silence, certain truths shine with unmistakable light.